It all started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I was at work, staring at the mountain of paperwork in front of me, when my phone buzzed. It was John, my husband, texting me about an urgent family matter. My stomach tightened because when John said something was urgent, it usually meant trouble. He never dramatized things unnecessarily. I excused myself from the meeting I was in and stepped outside to call him. As soon as he picked up, I could hear the tension in his voice. "Emma, I'm sorry to interrupt your work, but something's wrong with Mom. Can you meet me at her house right away?" That's when I knew something serious was happening. His mother, a woman who had been unpredictable and hard to understand for years, had never been an easy person to deal with, but John had always handled it. This felt different. I quickly wrapped up my tasks, told my boss I had a family emergency, and left the office. As I drove to John's mother's house, a sense of dread began creeping over me. It wasn't just about his mother's usual antics or her difficult personality. There had been whispers within the family for weeks about financial issues she was hiding, and I couldn't help but feel that today everything might come to a head. John's mother had always been somewhat secretive about her life. She spent money freely, traveled often, and hosted lavish dinners, but no one really knew where all the money was coming from. John had tried to ask her about her finances a few times, but she would always deflect, assuring him that everything was fine. Now, with John's call, it seemed that the truth was finally catching up with her. I wondered if she was finally ready to admit what had been going on, or if something far worse had happened. When I arrived at the house, I found John waiting for me on the porch. His face was pale, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Emma, it's worse than we thought," he said, not bothering with a greeting. He led me inside, where his mother was sitting on the couch, wringing her hands nervously. She looked up at me with wide, teary eyes, but there was something off about her demeanor. She wasn't just sad or distressed. She seemed cornered, like a trapped animal. "Mom, just tell her what you told me," John urged. His mother sighed deeply, her voice shaky. "I've made some mistakes, Emma," she admitted, her words trembling with regret. "Big mistakes. I trusted the wrong people, and now I don't know how to fix it." My heart pounded in my chest as I exchanged a glance with John. The room was thick with tension, and I knew we were about to hear something we weren't prepared for. As John's mother began to speak, the story she unraveled was worse than anything we had imagined. Over the last few years, she had been swindled out of her savings by a series of scams. It started small, a bad investment here, a failed business venture there, but soon she found herself deeply in debt. To make matters worse, she had taken out loans in John's name without his knowledge, believing she could pay them back before he ever found out. But the debts had grown, and now they were insurmountable. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," she cried, her voice breaking. "I thought I could handle it, but now they're threatening to take everything. I didn't know who else to turn to." John looked stunned, and I could feel the weight of what she was saying sink in. She had not only put herself in a terrible financial situation, but had dragged us into it as well, without our knowledge. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a disaster. John sat down heavily on the couch, his face a mix of disbelief and anger. "Mom, why didn't you come to us sooner?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "We could have helped you before things got this far." His mother looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "I was ashamed," she whispered. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I thought I could fix it on my own." Her words hung in the air, but they did little to ease the tension. The reality of the situation was settling in. We were now facing a mountain of debt, not just hers, but ours too. And with John's name on some of those loans, this wasn't just a financial issue. It was legal. "What are we supposed to do now?" I asked, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. John's mother didn't have an answer. For the first time in her life, she seemed truly helpless, and that terrified me. We spent the next few days trying to untangle the mess John's mother had created. We met with lawyers, financial advisors, and anyone else we thought could help us figure out what to do. But every meeting seemed to end the same way, with more bad news. The debts were too high, and the loans in John's name couldn't simply be erased. If we didn't act fast, his credit would be ruined, and we could lose everything. It felt like we were drowning, and no one could throw us a lifeline. One evening, as we sat at home, exhausted from another day of trying to find a solution, John turned to me. "Emma, I don't know how we're going to get through this," he admitted. "We've worked so hard to build our life together, and now it feels like it's all slipping away." His words broke my heart, but I knew we couldn't give up. Not yet. It was during one of these meetings that we discovered something truly shocking, something that shifted the entire situation. The financial advisor we had been working with, a sharp and meticulous woman named Sarah, had been combing through the paperwork, trying to find a way out for us. "There's something odd about these loans," she said one afternoon, frowning at a document. "Some of these signatures don't look right." John and I exchanged a confused glance. "What do you mean?" I asked. Sarah looked up, her expression serious. "I think your mother may have been involved in more than just being scammed. These loans, they don't just seem like mistakes. They seem like fraud." The word hit me like a ton of bricks. Fraud? Could it be possible that John's mother hadn't just been a victim in all of this, but had knowingly forged documents to cover her tracks? The possibility that John's mother had knowingly committed fraud was almost too much to process. We had always thought of her as irresponsible and impulsive, but dishonest? That was a whole different story. We confronted her the next day. John was calm but firm as he presented the information we had uncovered. "Mom, there's something you need to tell us," he said, his voice steady. "Some of these loans have signatures that don't match. Did you forge them?" His mother's reaction was immediate. Her face turned pale and her hands started trembling. "John, I didn't mean for it to go this far," she stammered, avoiding his gaze. "I was desperate. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out." The truth hit us like a freight train. She hadn't just fallen into debt by accident. She had actively tried to cover up her mistakes, dragging John's name into the mess in the process. John stood up, walking away from the conversation, trying to gather his thoughts. The weight of betrayal was evident in his every step. His mother had always been difficult, but this was different. This wasn't a mistake. It was deception, and it wasn't just hurting her anymore. It was affecting our future. "Emma, I don't know if I can ever forgive her," John said quietly when he finally turned back to me. His mother sat silently on the couch, wringing her hands, tears silently streaming down her face. Part of me felt pity for her, but another part of me was furious. How could she do this to her son? How could she do this to us? As much as I wanted to comfort John, I knew that this was something we couldn't just move past. This would change everything. Over the next few weeks, John barely spoke to his mother. We decided to hire an attorney to see what legal actions we could take to protect ourselves. Our lawyer explained that the situation was complicated. "If we can prove that the loans were forged, we might be able to clear John's name," she explained. "But that would mean turning your mother in for fraud." The idea of pressing charges against his own mother was something John couldn't even begin to wrap his head around. "I don't want her to go to jail," he said one night after another tense meeting. "But we can't let this continue. I can't let her keep ruining our lives." The decision hung heavily over us. How do you choose between protecting yourself and turning your own family over to the authorities? Finally, after sleepless nights and countless conversations, John made the hardest decision of his life. He confronted his mother one last time. "Mom, I love you, but I can't let this go on," he said, his voice breaking. "We've tried everything, but this is too much. I'm going to clear my name, even if it means you have to face the consequences." His mother sobbed uncontrollably, begging him to reconsider, but John stood firm. We filed the necessary paperwork to have the loans investigated for fraud. As much as it broke his heart, John knew this was the only way forward. It wasn't about punishing his mother. It was about saving our future. The investigation took months, and during that time, John and I tried to rebuild our lives. His relationship with his mother was shattered, and we both carried the weight of that loss every day. In the end, the courts ruled in our favor. John's name was cleared, and his mother faced charges for fraud. She was given a light sentence, but the emotional toll was far heavier. John and I moved forward, but the experience left scars that would never fully heal. We had survived the storm, but the cost was high. Still, As we looked toward the future, we knew one thing for certain. No matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. And that, in the end, was the only